I never imagined that my entire life would collapse from a single phone call. But that's exactly what started the end. I was at my office desk on the 19th floor of a high-rise building in the heart of Berlin. The space resembled a huge terrarium, cool, transparent, with neat rows of screens and exhausted faces, worn out from spreadsheets and endless reports. I worked at Bergman and Klein, a reputable consulting firm where employees bragged about the volume of coffee consumed during sleepless nights and the hours spent without rest. Here, no one mentioned compassion, empathy, or just plain humanity. Only performance metrics, deadlines, and bonuses. My name was Alex, and I was 33. I held the position of group manager, leading a team of analysts. The work was grueling, but I believed it was for security, for prospects, for my mother, to whom I had promised that one day I'd buy a villa by the lake. That call caught me off guard. On the display, Mum, I smiled. "Hello, Mom," I said without looking away from the screen. But instead of her usual affectionate tone, a stranger's trembling voice came through. "Mr. Schmidt, this is from St. Joseph's Clinic. We have bad news about your mother." The world narrowed to the sound of her breathing on the speaker. I registered nothing but that pause, soaked in fear. Mom had passed away, a stroke, sudden, no hope. I remember sinking to the floor in the office, feeling my legs give way. Colleagues bustled around, someone brought water, someone patted my back. But in my mind, only one thought echoed: I didn't get to say goodbye. The next day, I contacted my boss, Martin, the senior partner. He looked eternally young, always pressed suit, impeccable smirk, and an icy gaze, as if he saw people only as numbers. "Martin, I need a couple of days, the funeral," my voice broke. "It's Mom." "I'm aware," he cut in. "But you're aware it's reporting season. Without you, the project stalls. How many do you need? One day?" "2 or 3, I replied, feeling a flash of irritation inside. "Fine," he said. "I'll approve one day. The rest is up to you." "It's the funeral." I couldn't believe what I heard. "I'm truly sorry for your loss, Alex, honestly, but business doesn't wait." I went anyway. Even if it cost me my job, I couldn't do otherwise. The funeral was modest. A small cemetery by the river, a cool breeze from the water, and old family acquaintances. I stood by the coffin, looking at the white roses, and thought about how something fundamental had been ripped out of me. Mom was my only truly close person, and all that remained was guilt for not being with her in her last moment. 3 days later, I returned to the office. I was met with oppressive silence. No one said a word. Only Martin, passing by, tossed, "Hope you're recovered." I sat at my desk in silence. My badge wouldn't activate. "Access error." I contacted it. They exchanged glances, said it was on management's orders. And then it hit me. I'd been suspended. No call, no notice, no explanation. Later, HR sent a terse email. "The firm has decided to terminate the contract due to unauthorized absence from duty." I sat in my apartment, clutching that document, feeling everything fall apart. 10 years building a career, sleepless nights, defending initiatives, working weekends, and it all ended because I went to my own mother's funeral. I posted on LinkedIn, without rage, just the facts, how the firm got rid of an employee for going to say goodbye to his mother. A day later, it went viral, thousands of reactions. "That's disgusting. I worked there, they're just like that. Hang in there, buddy." Martin didn't expect it to blow up. But while the network boiled with outrage, he just went quiet. And for the first time, I realized speaking out wasn't in vain. Later, one of the partners called, offered to resolve the situation. Money, a reference letter, a small payout if I deleted the post. I declined. My mom didn't deserve her memory traded for payouts. But at that moment, I didn't suspect it was just the start. What seemed like an abyss was merely the entrance to a labyrinth from which escape isn't easy. My post became a hit, but with it, I turned into a target for hate. People started accusing me of playing the victim, seeking fame, all for the buzz. Recruiters from other firms rejected me because you have a questionable reputation, you're confrontational. The world I knew began crumbling even more. Sometimes I still hear her voice. "Alex, remember who you are." I haven't forgotten, Mom. I just now understand that in a society where reports are valued over lives, you have to decide for yourself who to become. I never aimed to be in the center of the news. I just wanted someone to say, "This is unfair." But the network is a strange thing. It knows no shades. It either makes you a victim or a monster. 2 days after my post went viral, the phone wouldn't stop. Reporters, ex-colleagues, strangers, some sent support, some pure hate. Couldn't you just report to the boss? Typical whiner, fired for good reason. Another fragile millennial. I scrolled through the comments, feeling something break inside. I wasn't a hero, nor a villain, just a person who lost his mother and job in a week. That evening I sat by the window. Outside, rain turned the city into a blurred watercolor sketch. On the phone, hundreds of notifications. On the laptop screen, a message from Martin. "Alex, your post has drawn unwanted attention to the firm. If you don't delete it by week's end, we'll initiate a defamation lawsuit." I reread it dozens of times. Defamation? I just described what happened, every word truth. The next day, a notice came from Bergman and Klein's legal department. They demanded public apologies, otherwise court. I froze. I wasn't ready. I had no funds, no lawyer, no emotional strength. I turned to Thomas, a former colleague, the only one who genuinely sympathized. We met at a pub near the office where I used to spend evenings after shifts. Everything seemed the same melody, the same dim lamps, the aroma of coffee and alcohol. "Damn, Alex," he said, shaking his head. "I know what they did to you, it's nasty." "They're threatening a lawsuit," I replied, gripping my coffee mug, "for telling the truth." Thomas smirked. "That's Bergman and Klein. They always crush with fear. The key, don't give in." "But if they sue, I can't afford lawyers." He looked serious. "Then tell it wider, let everyone know." I pondered. The idea seemed crazy. But inside, something clicked, that feeling when you're backed against the wall and all that's left is to step forward. A day later, I posted the second part of the story. Not as whining, but as facts. Screenshots of correspondence, HR notices, internal directives where they suspended me for unauthorized absence. I didn't name names, no surnames, but those in the firm understood without hints. The post exploded. 100,000 likes. Thousands of opinions. Reporters from Die Welt and ARD News contacted me. Then silence. No calls from office acquaintances. No support from ex-colleagues, just a vacuum. On the third day, a call from an unknown number. "Alex Schmidt?" asked an icy voice. "Yes." "This is legal. This is a formal warning. You've violated the non-disclosure agreement." "I didn't sign anything like that." "You signed the employment agreement, paragraph 14.2, the tone hardened. "And if you don't stop spreading fakes, we'll proceed." "My mother died," I said quietly. "And you got rid of me because I was at her funeral. That's not fiction, that's reality." "The court will determine what's reality." The voice cut off and hung up. After that, real hell began. My name popped up in searches, on forums. "That guy from LinkedIn whining about his mom." Some threatened. Some offered help for a chat. I stopped sleeping. At night, I wandered the apartment, looking at an old photo of my mother on the wall. She stood by the river, laughing, wind tousling her hair. I mentally told her, "Mom, I didn't want it to turn out like this." On the fourth day, Martin wrote again. "Alex, giving you a final chance. Delete the posts, apologize, and maybe we'll overlook the incident." I replied briefly, "No." An hour later, a message from Die Welt. "Alex, we'd like to cover your story, all anonymous, but people should know about corporate morals." I agreed. A week later, the article came out. Headline: "Employee fired for attending mother's funeral, the price of corporate loyalty." It spread across Europe. I received hundreds of messages from those who'd been through similar. Healthcare workers, teachers, developers all echoed. "I was suspended when I lost a loved one. Thanks for speaking the truth." But with support came horror. The firm launched a counterattack. They accused me of spreading fakes, issued an official denial, labeling me disobedient and emotionally unstable. And I realized they aimed to erase my name. The phone went silent. Hiring agencies quieted. Every interview ended the same. Sorry, but you're too problematic a case for hiring. I was no longer just Alex. I became that guy who clashed with the corporation. One evening when I'd almost resigned myself, Thomas called. Alex, turn on the news, quick. I switched on the TV and froze. ARD was broadcasting a report. Bergman and Qley accused of systematic pressure on staff and labor violations. I saw the familiar building, the same 19th floor where my desk used to be, and an interview with an anonymous employee confirming all my words. Martin was under investigation. The firm tried to hush it up, but it was too late. A week later, their offices emptied. The scandal went international. Investors pulled out, partners terminated contracts. I should have rejoiced, but instead I felt only emptiness. Mom always said, "Revenge doesn't bring peace, son. Only justice dulls the pain." I didn't know if I'd achieved justice, but I knew for sure I was no longer the one who once feared losing his position. That evening I went to the river, where Mom and I often walked in my childhood. The wind whipped my face, waves murmured something ancient, eternal. I quietly said, "Mom, I did what I could." And for the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to cry. Not from anger, not from horror, but simply because I finally let go. When I returned to the office the next Monday, everything seemed even colder. No one met my gaze. My desk, once piled with documents and cups, looked alien, clean, lifeless, unwelcoming. I'd been absent for just 3 days. 3, but in corporate terms that equaled eternity. As I sat down, I noticed a scrap of paper taped to the monitor. Meeting with HR 10:00. No greeting, no condolences, no welcome back. Just a reminder that in this space, grief is an obstacle. When I entered the HR office, my manager Anna was already there, arms crossed, lips pursed, as if holding back empathy by force. "Alex," she said, "we need to discuss your recent behavior." "My behavior?" I echoed, stunned. "You mean going to my mother's funeral?" Her jaw tightened. "Not exactly that. About your approach to communication and reliability. You didn't notify us properly about the absence." I blinked, trying to hold back. "I sent 3 emails and called you personally before leaving." Honor exchanged a glance with David, the HR specialist who was flipping through printouts. "Yes, we received one," David said quietly, "but there's no official leave request in the system." "I was at the clinic watching my mom fade, David," I said softly. "I wasn't thinking about internal platforms." Anna's tone sharpened. "We understand it was a tough time, but procedures are for everyone. When you ignore them, it affects the team." I felt my throat tighten. "You're saying I'm being punished for burying my mom?" Silence. Anna's gaze slid to her notes. "We're issuing an official warning for unauthorized absence. Sign here." She pushed the sheet across the table. I looked at it, then at her, then at the sheet again. It was absurd, as if reality had shifted and I found myself in another world where compassion doesn't exist. That evening I sat in my car in the company parking lot long after sunset. The building loomed above like a glass giant, sterile, perfect, indifferent. I'd worked there for 10 years. Late shifts, weekends, missed holidays. I'd helped deliver projects worth millions of euros. And now, my career was crumbling because I dared to grieve. I called my sister. When she answered, I couldn't even speak, just sat shaking. "Alex," she said gently, "you don't owe them your soul. You did the right thing. Mom would tell you to walk away." I smiled bitterly. Walk away from what? The loan, the insurance, all the security. There was a pause on the line. Then she said, "Then make them regret it." In the following weeks, the atmosphere in the office worsened. Anna started excluding me from key meetings. Emails that used to come to me now went to others. My tasks were quietly reassigned. One morning I arrived and my badge wouldn't work. Security had to check manually. The guard looked at me with that awkward, pitying expression reserved for those already half pushed out. By lunch, an email from HR. Subject: termination of employment contract. After internal review, we've determined that your recent behavior contradicts the firm's attendance policies. Your employment is terminated effective immediately. No call, no conversation, just an email. I sat staring at the screen numb. My hands shook as I reread, trying to grasp the absurdity. I lost my job, not for theft, not for failure, not for deceit, but for being at my mother's funeral. The next morning, I woke up at 6 out of habit, then realized there was nowhere to rush. No morning meeting, no reminders, just silence. And that silence was worse than any punishment. Days passed, then weeks. I tried applying elsewhere, but when recruiters asked why I left the last job, I didn't know what to say. Unprofessional grief, that's not for a CV. Bills piled up, savings dwindled, sleep disrupted. But beneath all the exhaustion, a quiet anger smoldered. They didn't just suspend me, they erased me. Then one afternoon, something changed. I was scrolling LinkedIn out of inertia when I saw a post from Anna. She was smiling in a photo with a glass of champagne, caption, "So proud of our team for a new record quarter. Leadership is about setting standards." Something inside snapped. 10 years of loyalty erased by a fake smile and corporate hashtags. I opened my email and started typing. Not to her, not to HR, to a reporter I knew from a tech magazine. We'd once discussed burnout and mental health in the industry. He gave me his contacts. The subject I entered: how I lost my job for attending my mother's funeral and how the firm covered it up. It took 3 weeks before the article saw the light. By then, I'd almost changed my mind, but when it came out, it spread like wildfire. On Reddit's front page, thousands of comments. People shared their own stories of corporate inhumanity and grief. The firm's name was everywhere, in trends for the wrong reasons. Employees started leaking internal chats, revealing how bosses discussed me as dead weight. Anna's LinkedIn posts were screenshotted and shared in communities. Partners began distancing themselves. The PR department went into chaos. And me, for the first time in months, I slept peacefully. But corporate retaliation is never clean. Weeks later, a notice from the firm's lawyers, packed with legal jargon and veiled threats about libel. They wanted me to retract the article, clarify it was a misunderstanding. I didn't respond, because it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was the truth, and truth doesn't owe them silence. Months passed, the noise faded as all scandals do. The firm continued, just like the network, but I didn't. I still wake up at night, half expecting that HR email. Still look at my phone, waiting for a meeting notification that won't come. Losing the job didn't just break my career, it destroyed my sense of belonging. Because I learned something cruel. In corporate life, you're never family. You're a resource until you become a burden. A few weeks ago, I visited my mother's grave again. The grass had grown, even and fresh. The air was quiet. I sat and whispered, "I made it, Mom, they won't erase me." And in that pause, I felt pride and grief intertwine, like two parts of one broken heart. That day, I left without a position, without status, without false security, but with something more valuable: character. And perhaps that's what she always wanted. I lost my job for grieving, but when I publicly exposed the boss, everything flipped. Strange how silence can be louder than any crowd. After my story spread, I thought I'd finally feel liberation, vindication, like I'd reclaimed what was stolen. But in reality, liberation feels empty when it follows loss. For a few weeks, I existed in the echo of attention. Hundreds of messages flooded my inbox, strangers thanking me for speaking out, sharing their own nightmare stories from the corporate world. At first, it warmed me, like I hadn't screamed into the void for nothing. But soon the messages changed. Recruiters who had ignored me suddenly wanted contact. Publications requested interviews. Podcasts invited to discuss resilience. Everyone wanted a piece of the story, not me, just the story. Because in this society, even suffering has a PR cycle. Then came the call. It was a calm Tuesday morning. The phone rang from an unknown number. When I answered, a familiar voice spoke. "Alex, this is David from HR." I froze. He cleared his throat. "Calling informally, there's something you should know." I stayed silent, just listened. The firm has been in damage control for weeks, he continued. Anna's on indefinite leave. Lawyers are sorting the mess, but the point, they're considering a settlement offer to you to close it quietly. I chuckled, dryly bitterly. Now they're suddenly concerned. David hesitated. Alex, they just want to move on, and you should too. It could tide you over. How much? I asked. He paused. 150,000. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. 150,000 euros. That's more than half a year's salary, enough for debts, maybe to restart life. But then I asked, what's the condition? Standard, sign an NDA, delete the post, agree to stay silent about the firm. There it was, the trap. They weren't offering peace. They were buying my silence. That evening, I sat in the apartment with the screen off, dim light, the document on the kitchen table. I stared at it for hours. 150,000 euros, an exit from chaos, a reset button. But every time I thought about signing, I saw my mother's face. The way she looked when saying, "Never let people claim your pain doesn't matter." I poured myself a drink and another. By midnight, I was drunk enough to talk to shadows. "Mom," I whispered, "what would you choose?" Silence answered. The next morning, I opened Reddit. My story was still there, still being shared, still alive. I scrolled comments, some warm, some angry, some skeptical, and one caught me. I was under Anna too. She ruined my life, thanks for speaking up. I stared at it for a long time, because suddenly I understood, if I take the deal, if I delete, I'll erase that person's voice too. So I rejected the offer, deleted the lawyer's email, and chose the hard path. 2 months later, the consequences closed in. Anna's name leaked in connection to the case. The firm issued one of those polished, emotionless statements about reviewing internal policies. HR pretended to care, the board was reshuffled, but deep down I knew nothing had really changed. I'm still jobless, still checking my balance before purchases, still waking at 3 a.m. from dreams where I'm back in the office, hearing the hum of lights. That's the side they don't talk about, the after. You expose injustice and the world claps for a week, then moves on, you don't. One afternoon, I was in a cafe downtown sipping cheap coffee when someone sat across from me. I looked up. It was Emma, one of my old colleagues. "Alex," she said softly, "I didn't think you'd want to see anyone from the firm." "Almost don't," I admitted. She smiled sadly. "Understandable, but I wanted to say thank you. You should know, because of your post, a few of us filed complaints too. Now it's all under investigation. Anna's gone for good." I blinked, processing. "You're serious?" She nodded. "You started something, Alex, really started it." I didn't know what to say. Gratitude, relief, pride, but all I felt was exhaustion. When Emma left, I sat there, watching people hurry outside, suits, laptops, smiles like masks. It struck me how fast life flows, barely leaving room for grief. We just keep clocking in, pretending normal, hoping no one notices the cracks. I pulled out my phone and opened my post, the one that started it all. Over 1 million views now, tens of thousands of comments. But as I scrolled, something new caught my eye, a message request, from a woman I didn't recognize. "Hi Alex, sorry for what happened. I'm a producer from a documentary team. We cover workplace injustice stories, open to chatting." I stared for a long time. Part of me wanted to agree. Continue the narrative, make it meaningful. But another, quiet, broken, just wanted peace. To stop reliving pain for views and applause. I didn't reply, just locked the phone and sat, breathing. 6 months passed. I found freelance work, nothing outstanding, but it pays the bills. Some days are good, some aren't. There are mornings I wake grateful I stood firm, and others when I regret not taking the money and vanishing. But in truth, both paths hurt. There's no happy ending when the system is built to break you for humanity. A few nights ago, I was going through my mother's things. Letters, photos, a few keepsakes she treasured. At the bottom of the box, I found a note written to me at 16. The paper yellowed, but her handwriting still clear. "You don't need to be the strongest, Alex. Just stay kind, even when it costs you." I sat in silence for a long time. then smiled a small, painful smile. Because maybe that's the point. Maybe grief isn't what you leave behind. Maybe it's what you carry, a weight reminding you that you're still human in a world that punishes humanity. The story never truly ended. The firm rebranded months later, pretending a fresh start. Anna vanished from LinkedIn, David quietly left, and I moved on, not healed, not triumphant, just older, wiser, tired in a way that doesn't fade. Sometimes I still dream of that office, endless screen glow, printer hum, fake smiles. But in those dreams, I always see my mother at the door. And she repeats one thing: "You did the right thing." When I wake, it still hurts, but it hurts less knowing I didn't trade her memory for silence. My boss suspended me for attending my mother's funeral. HR called it unprofessional grief. I went public, exposed the firm, and watched it crumble. They tried to buy my silence. I refused. Now I live with less money, fewer connections, and no illusions. But at least I sleep at night.